Welcome back to Think Dyslexia Network. I'm really excited to have my guest join in just a minute. Okay, I see some people are joining. Hi. Hi, Kimberly. Thanks for joining. Waiting for my guest. Okay, here is Dr. Karen. Okay, I'm going to request, here we go, view request. Hi, Dr. Karen. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Nice to see you, Dr. Lauren.
Yes, it's so good to see you too. So whenever I start these lives, I feel like my head is cut off and I can never position.
So low.
Yes, I feel like I have to duck in my seat. Anyway, thank you so much for finding this time. I'm very excited to delve into this conversation, and I know there are a lot of people who are joining right now, so let's get started. So welcome to Think Dyslexia Network. So I put these lives on my YouTube channel. So for anyone that doesn't have Instagram, you can view everything on there as well. And I view these lives as a resource for people to learn, gain knowledge and any questions they have. And I want that to be like a one-stop shop for like dyslexia education. So first things first, let me introduce myself to the audience. I'm Dr. Lauren, and as I always share, I am an adult who does not have dyslexia. I'm just a very passionate special educator, and dyslexia has just been kind of my passion the last 10 years. So yes, and I want to introduce you to the audience. So Dr. Karen Wilson is a clinical neuropsychologist and the owner of West LA Neuropsychology, PC. And over the last 17 years, Dr. Karen Wilson has worked and has focused on assessments and neurodevelopmental disorders in children and also adolescents. She also has a great deal of experience evaluating adults as well. And she began her private practice, working in private practice in 2003. And in 2010, you formed your own independent practice. So yes, so very excited to hear your expertise and, some of these questions I hope we can really delve into. So yes, did you want to say anything before I kind of go through the questions?
I'm thrilled to be here. I've been following you and the work that you do and getting information out about dyslexia to the population. I think that's so important. It's something that I feel very passionate about, and a lot of the colleagues that I connect with, that's something that we feel passionate about, increasing understanding of kids and adults who struggle with learning challenges, and then giving parents and giving individuals tools to help address some of those struggles.
Absolutely. So I want to outline these questions first for my audience who has not seen the question, so they kind of know where we're going. So the first one is really just kind of talking about what a clinical neuropsychologist does. Like if you can kind of talk about the day-to-day, who do you typically see? The second one, I had to throw in, just a little bit of race questions because we're two Black educators and I just really wanted to get your professional experience. But, what are your typical demographics for your clientele? Are they typically diagnosed with dyslexia? How do the families get support? I'm really interested in that. Also, when you are diagnosing and writing the evaluation for students, like what kind of supports do you personally recommend? And then the last question is really talking about your practice and what, people on the West Coast can kind of get from your practice, or I don't know if you're doing virtual, but either way, I want to hear a lot about it. So let's start with the first one. So you're a clinical neuropsychologist. Can you explain to our audience what your job entails and who you typically see as a neuropsychologist?
Absolutely. So I'm clinical neuro basically means that I'm a clinical psychologist who has specialized training in neuropsychology, which is the study of brain behavior relationships. And so I had this typical training of a clinical neuropsychologist, but then did an additional 3 years of postdoctoral training to really dig deeper into an understanding of how the brain and challenges in the brain and differences in the wiring of the brain impact behaviors and cognitions.
Okay.
My background comes from, and how that manifests in the work that I do is that I really focus a great deal on kids, on adolescents, young adults who are struggling with neurodevelopmental challenges that are impacting their daily lives. And so as a clinical neuropsychologist, people send individuals to me because there's a struggle that they're facing, and they may not know why a child, an adolescent, or a young adult is struggling in a particular way. And so they send them to figure it out. So I conduct, and there's 3 of us in my practice. We conduct comprehensive neuropsychological, psychoeducational evaluations that help to identify the source of the struggle. Why is a child or an adolescent struggling in school, and then provide this information to parents and teachers so that we know how to better support them.
Okay, wow. So that's a nice summary. And I think for me personally, I was a psychology major undergrad, but I can understand that 3 years of extra postdoc to understand the brain and the wiring, because neurodevelopmental disorders can be ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, a whole bunch of brain-based learning differences. So that makes a lot of sense with the specialty for sure.
Absolutely. And you really have to know, again, those nuances in terms of where the struggle lies in order to know how to intervene.
Right.
Earlier today with another psychologist, and we were saying that there's a lot of overlap in symptoms where kids are dealing with reading comprehension, for example, for a number of different, as they're having difficulty with focusing to the information page, they're having difficulty with phonological processing,
right,
on the page. There can be a lot of anxiety that is impacting their ability to access their thinking. And so unless you dig deeper in discovering why they're struggling, then you really don't know where to intervene, whether that's
right.
an based reading program or a treatment for anxiety or a treatment for an ADHD.
Right. No, that makes complete sense for sure. So let's kind of focus in on dyslexia right now. So what are the demographics of your clientele? And within that clientele, who is diagnosed with dyslexia? And do you find the families of color feel supported by their school districts? And are they equipped to help their child? I know that's a lot right there.
And I think that it really depends on the family. It depends on the school district. I'm in Southern California, and we have so many different school districts. There's Los Angeles Unified School District, there's Santa Monica, Malibu, there's Culver City Unified, Long Beach. And so it depends on the school district, and also it depends on the school, because in the school district, 2 schools can handle kids who are struggling with learning challenges very differently. And then a lot of independent schools. So in terms of who I serve kids from that attend public schools and also independent schools. I see kids who are homeschooled or attending are part of a micro school. And so I see a wide range of students from different backgrounds. I see kids for private assessments. Some of the evaluations we do are funded by the school district, so they're independent educational evaluations. I will see kids, and by doing those, I see kids from a wide range of demographics. But in terms of age, I think most of the kids who see me are usually coming in between kindergarten and 4th grade. That's usually the age range most of the kids that I see. Not that I couldn't see a high schooler for the first time coming in for the evaluation, but most of the time they're in between 1st and 4th grade coming in for their first evaluation. I do see evaluation because kids change, and you have interventions and you want to reevaluate to see where they are. Have they benefited from the intervention? And that's always wonderful to see. But it's that first evaluation that I would say that is probably important, because it tells you where the kids are right now. And then it helps you to really address the difficulty with a solid intervention plan that really helps them thrive and achieve their full potential, which is what you want.
Absolutely. So since you are in LA, I know that there are many types of people that live there, but people of color, in terms of your practice, do you see a lot of students of color, or is it mostly Caucasian folks?
It's mostly Caucasian, but more and more people of color are coming into the practice to get evaluations done. And it's a mix. They attend independent schools, and some of those independent schools actually fund the evaluations for their students who may not be able to afford an evaluation themselves. Again, I see a lot of kids of color who are coming from public schools where the school district is paying for those evaluations, and then some are self-funded by parents as well. But I would say that most of the kids that I see are Caucasian.
Okay. And I'm always just curious to kind of get the demographics of where, you know, the lay of the land. And I currently work at a private school, and I personally feel like there is a little bit of a equity issue where some kids of color do need that testing, and we don't have a psychologist on campus. And on top of that, while these parents are either paying tuition or partial tuition or have scholarship, they can't just, you know, take $3,000 out of their pocket and say, here you go, let me get a neuropsych evaluation. So I think that's amazing that some of the school districts in your area do fund that, because there are families that it doesn't cover, insurance doesn't cover it. And it's helpful to know that the school district will pay for that, you know, that really comprehensive assessment.
Absolutely. And it's a process. I mean, you probably have to talk to an educational attorney to know what the process is. But a lot of parents, I would say, in terms of barriers, and we talked about, you know, why parents may not pursue an evaluation. Oftentimes they don't know what it would entail and how it would be helpful. So I think one of the things that's needed, or really, is more discussions like this, more awareness of the parent rights in terms of, if you're seeing a struggle with your child, what can you ask for? Those advocacy skills for parents and for students.
Right. No, absolutely. Well, and that actually leads to my next question. So how often are you diagnosing students with dyslexia, and what kind of supports? Because I know at the end of the evaluation, there's always like the recommendations of what should be happening at schools. What do you usually put on your evaluations?
Yeah, it depends on what is co-occurring with the diagnosis. So in terms of dyslexia, by the time parents and families get to me, they're already seeing the struggle. And so there is a diagnosis. The most common diagnoses I see are ADHD, dyslexia, and those are probably the three most common that I see in my practice. But we know from the research that I think 1 in 5 students has some form of dyslexia.
Absolutely.
I probably should be seeing more kids given the number of children who are in Southern California.
Yes.
And I think what that speaks to is that we often have in our minds, oh, everybody's diagnosed with ADHD, or there's so many people being diagnosed with learning disorder. But really, what the research is showing us is that there's an underdiagnosis of these learning challenges and these learning disorders, rather, neurodevelopmental disorders, and even mislabeling. We know about children of color are often mislabeled as having a conduct disorder or a behavioral problem, where under that is a real learning disorder or a social emotional issue that's leading to behavior. You know, when I think about reading, I think about that child in the classroom who is really struggling with phonological processing, and they are in a classroom where part of the culture is everybody has to take a turn reading out loud.
Exactly.
That child going to do? They're going to avoid. They're going to maybe act out and go to the principal's office because that feels better to them. It gives them more control. They can be in the principal's office and not be in a classroom that is aversive and have to read out loud and feel kind of the what their peers are thinking about them aloud or under their breath. And so I think there can be a lot of mislabeling, particularly in children of color.
Absolutely. And, you know, I really want to touch back to your comment earlier about these conversations need to happen. And I also think it's really impactful for just society to see 2 women of color speaking of these things as well, because I often feel like in, you know, the Black community, I feel like disabilities are kind of seen as it's a negative, it's a stigma. And, you don't want to be labeled, and rightfully so, because there have been bad things that have happened. But I feel like if there is a comfort of like, I know where I can go, I know what resources to look for, I know who I can ask, I think, hopefully there will be a more of a opening of like, wow, I really think my child should be evaluated. I'm not sure what's going on, but I know what to do.
Right.
And
That stigma is real. And I think it
yeah.
crosses demographic lines in terms of that stigma. But I do agree that there are differences in terms of access to information and psychoeducation, how readily available that is for families. And, a lot of parents are afraid of a label.
Mm-hmm.
I want a label for my child and what that means. But what I try to say to families, it's not about the label, it's really about understanding. Because if you don't understand, again, and I say this all the time, why a child is struggling, you don't know how to help them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I did a professional development today for my school, and I was actually talking about dyslexia accommodations and supports. And I think a lot of the teachers I work with struggle with seeing a diagnosis that says neurodevelopmental disorder. And most of these, teachers don't have that special education background, and they're thinking like, how do I help this student? What does this mean? And so I really want to unpack those things for my staff to say, let's kind of break this down. Let me kind of give you some resources so you feel like you're supported. So then you feel like you can support the parents as well. So there are many different components to this. And I know that can obviously be another conversation. But I do want to get to my last point, and I would love for you to share more information about West LA Neuropsychology and just what your organization's mission, vision, all of the goodness that is your business. Please share.
So West LA Neuropsychology is my private practice. We have 3 clinicians in our practice, and our primary focus is really on digging into the struggles that kids are facing, doing these in-depth evaluations, and then writing a really good and strong treatment plan that can be implemented at home and at school to help students thrive and achieve their full potential. That's it in a nutshell in terms of what we do. And part of what we do is we connect to a lot of clinicians and educational support specialists and special education attorneys. So we have a huge do so that we can make appropriate referrals.
Mm-hmm.
And the other allied professionals in our network, we collaborate to do like this, to do town halls and to do webinars for parents and psychoeducation for educators. And so that's part of what our mission is not only to help the family who can make it into our, but how can we increase understanding and spread information about these struggles, interventions, and what parents and educators can do to better support students who struggle.
Yeah, that outreach is huge. And it sounds like you've been doing this since 2010, correct?
Yes, my private practice since 2010, and then really broadening it to a bigger mission in terms of collaborating with allied professionals in the last 2 years.
That's amazing. And those of you who are joining in, I know that you are on my page, but if you are not following Dr. Karen, you really should. I know you have a podcast out there that has some really good information and resources. So definitely get on that. And I do want to say, because I like to keep these short, and I like to keep people's attention, focused in on what the 4 questions were. So if you all are interested in a follow-up, please send me a DM, and hopefully Dr. Karen and I can link up our schedules and find something great for the future. But I really appreciate your time, your expertise, your knowledge. This was very impactful, and I learned a lot, and I'm really looking forward to connecting with you in the future.
I'm looking forward to the same, and I think we have a lot of collaborating that we can do, really bring attention to dyslexia and have even more conversations about what it is, what we can do to support students, and how we can get that information out to a broader audience. So thank you, and connecting.
Absolutely. Well, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, because it's almost 2:00, right? Over there. All right. Well, have a good one. And thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye.